Welcome back to the Cat's Tail. In this video, we're going to look at how your cards can give you an advantage, including by tuning them when necessary. Card advantage, a common concept in card games, generally means having more cards in your hand than your opponent. However, card advantage in Genius Invocation doesn't have quite the same function as in many card games. In many card games, if you run out of cards in hand, you basically stop being able to play the game. But in Genius Invocation, you can still take a lot of meaningful game actions by using the skills of your characters on board, even without using any cards. If you spend too many dice just drawing cards, you're likely to fall behind and end up losing the game. Most decks will want to run some way to draw cards, and there are many good cards you can include for this purpose. These are all balanced choices. The more efficient ones, like Treasure Seeking Sealy, come with some downside, usually making you wait a few turns for your cards. Which ones you want to include in your deck will come down to what sort of deck you are playing and how long you can afford to wait for your cards. So why would you want to run these cards and build up card advantage in the first place? Firstly, cards provide you with extra resources and options in addition to your usual actions on board. Furthermore, the options you get from cards in your hand are hidden to your opponent, unlike the skills of your characters, which are actions your opponent knows you have access to. The more different cards you have in hand, the more options you have, and the more your opponent will have to think about playing around your cards. If you have 0 cards in hand, your opponent knows exactly what you can and can't do, and they can predict your best move with 100% certainty. For many decks, you're relying on one or more cards as a key part of your game plan. For example, a control deck might have equipment cards such as weapons and artifacts it wants to equip onto an important character. An aggressive deck might really want to draw Gambler's Earrings. A combo deck might want to build up a critical mass of cards in hand to enable their combo turn. The more cards you draw, the more likely you are to draw those key cards, and the more consistent your deck will be. Finally, the ability to use cards for tuning gives extra value to card advantage. If you have lots of cards in hand, even if you can't make good use of playing all those cards, you have the security that you can tune the useless cards to make sure you can use whatever skills you want. This can bail you out if you get unlucky with die rolls or open up the possibility of using more powerful skills. However, if you have no cards or very few cards in hand, then you put yourself at risk of easily being ruined if you roll bad dice. When it comes to elemental tuning, choosing the correct cards to tune is an essential skill. In an ideal world, you should try to predict how the game will play out and which cards will give you useful options in the future. But since this is very hard to do, it's useful to have some general rules to know which cards you can afford to tune. In general, early on, you want to keep and play slow cards which give you value over time. For example, Paimon, or Sumeri City, or Treasure Seeking Sealy. But later on, you should be happy to tune these cards away. There might also be cards which are completely useless in a game, such as Send Off against a deck with no summons, or a second copy of a character equipment card when you already have one. So the only use for these would be for tuning. Cards which have immediate fast effects are often the strongest in the late game. For example, Lotus Flower Crisp and I Haven't Lost Yet. So avoid tuning these if possible. Situational cards like Leave It to Me and Calx's Arts also fall into this category. They can be very powerful in the right situation, although since they are situational, you might be happy to tune one if you have duplicates in hand, or depending on the board state. Also, here's a common mistake you should avoid making. Just because you have a dice fixing card in your hand, like Bestest Travel Companion or Toss Up, doesn't mean you should play it. If you only need to change one die, it's often better to tune a weak card in your hand and save your fixing card to use more efficiently later. In fact, if you do end up using Bestest Travel Companion or Toss Up to fix for just one die, it can be better to tune the card instead of playing it, because if you tune a card, it doesn't reveal what the card was to your opponent. This allows you to keep more information hidden about the cards you have left. Overall, drawing and saving cards in your hand has many advantages, providing you with more options, advancing your game plan, and opening up options through elemental tuning. You should think very hard before choosing to play or tune your cards to be sure it's worth it. Let's see how we can apply these ideas in some games. Okay, let's inspect this game to see how we can build some card advantage and how we know which cards to tune as well. So we're playing with Agent Electro charged here against an Overload team, and we're going to start off on our Oceanid. And after rolling our dice, you notice we've got 4 Hydro dice, and I decide that I'm going to want to use this elemental skill that costs 5 Hydro dice on this turn. So to do that, I need to choose one of the cards in my hand, either use one of these cards for fixing, or follow one of my other cards. Now, I'm quite likely to want to play the Liben this turn to make good use of my 3 other dice if I'm using the 5 cost. So that's going to get some immediate value, and that will be nice because that's going to get me some extra cards for next turn, and maybe save me having to fix some dice by giving me on the element dice too. So it's got to be one of these cards. Now, Lotus Flower Crisp is a very strong card which can be very important in against a lot of aggressive matchups, and having 2 Best of Travel companions, especially when we're going to have the dice fixing from Liben here, I think it's fine to use one of those. And I'm going to use it for tuning rather than playing it, because then the opponent doesn't actually know what card you've tuned, so it is slightly better to do it that way if you know that you only need 1 extra die of the right element. And then opponent's going to end up making their summons and dealing some overload damage. So on our next turn we're going to have some extra dice from our Liben, and that's really useful in this deck because there's some very important situational cards that you often want to draw. For example, Tubby and Cimeri City, and actually in this case a card that we've drawn here, which is an enchantment card for our Fatui Pyro Agent. So the more cards you draw, the more likely you are to have those situational cards. And so we can play that right now and start getting some value out of our Pyro Agent, converting the normal effects to Pyro, and getting some more charges of stealth.
This is just my luck.
Now in this position, with the rest of our dice, we have a few options we could choose to do. I'm going to choose to use the burst on my Fatui Pyro Agent, which requires that I tune or use one more card. Now again, Lotus Flower Crisp is a really nice card, we don't want to use it for fixing if you don't have to, especially in against a more aggressive deck. And out of the other cards, well, having one of these left over could be very useful. That could save us having to tune 2 cards in the future, and we only really need 1 die of the right element right now. Send Off as well could be very good against that deck. Leeway Harbour Wharf, best if you play it early, and we're getting to the point here where, I mean, the game might not even go on long enough for us to draw and play all those cards. So if we're not playing it this turn, which we're not if we're using the Agent Burst, it's probably fine to follow that one away. There we go. At this point we've still got a few cards left in our hand which provide us with good options, some helpful fixing. Lucky Dog Silver Circlet, which I judge could be useful to make sure we win the late game by getting some repeated value. And then some Lotus Flower Crisp to help us actually get there to the late game. Draw on here a few more options, a different food, a Monster Hash Brown, as well as Sangonomia Shrine, which could also provide us with some relevant healing potentially. Okay, so in this situation, I'm going to use this Lucky Dog Silver Circlet, start getting some value out of that. And if I'm going to use a skill on my Rodeo of Lock on Oceania, I'm going to need to tune 1 card. And in this situation, okay, I think both the foods here are potentially very useful in the late game. There's actually a chance that we play the Sangonomia Shrine on this turn. So I think it's now a good time to use this Bestest Travel Companion. There's a world in which perhaps the elements are useful, although also I think you could have just tuned that for the 1 die you needed. Okay, and we use the last Omni with the Electro in this case to play the Sanguinamia Shrine, because unlike the Sumeru or the Liyue Harbour Wolf, rather, that needs you to draw those cards and then play them to get value, this will heal for at least 2 at the end of our turn, and then maybe the game goes long enough for us to get another heal out of it. So it's getting some relevant value. Now in this case, opponent does have a Pyro die to give them the extra they need to kill our official here. We're going to heal for 2 with this, plus our 2 characters. That's going to help with the late game, so that's still very useful. Again, the cards we drew providing us with useful options, and then we just need to choose which of those options we want to keep and use, and which options we can throw away when we need to. And now we're getting towards the end of the game, so the slower cards that maybe don't give us an advantage until the end of the round or give us value over time are becoming less and less useful. Those Flower Crisp though, still a very useful card to have. We save that all the way from our opening hand without playing it, and here it's going to be able to save us the full 3 damage on an important character with this equipment on it, so that's very nice. Now here I tune Tubby, and I choose to tune Send Off as well, and the reason for this is, well, this is a good card against the deck. If I'm not playing it this turn, the game might not even go to the end of next turn, and then I don't really need this option. So if I'm not playing it this turn, this isn't necessarily a useful option to have. Tubby just way too slow, it's not going to do anything this game. And then we can keep the Calx's Arts in hand, because we can actually potentially see a line where we can use this to use our Agent Burst on the next turn to close out the game. So looking at the game state, decide that this card is the more valuable one to keep. And here, playing it safe, saving some health on our most important character on Radio of Lock, but still leaving our Pyro Agent here with 1 energy and with the Calx in hand. And with opponent's last character being Official, we can actually, they'd need a card like Heavy Strike, which they're unlikely to have in their deck, to actually threaten our agent here. So we can use that card we saved from last time, Calx's Arts, to close out the game here. And at the end of the game, we did draw a couple more cards than our opponent, and that was a really valuable resource to help us make sure we had the options we needed at every stage in the game. Okay, let's see here the importance of card advantage when we're playing as a control deck in this case. So we're playing here as Barbara Ito Noel, and we're therefore looking for, in this control deck, some of the key pieces in the late game are going to be Tenacity of the Millilith and the Bell, which will allow us to get more and more value out of our key character Ito. We haven't got any of those so far, but we do have some ways to draw cards in these Libans. And since the opponent's also playing a slow deck here, we don't expect to be too punished for this. It's best just to draw the options now and have those extra cards, those extra resources to use when we need them. So instead of the normal 2 cards with the healthy 2 Libans, we're going to be drawing a total of 6 cards before our next turn, which should give us some really good options and increase the chance that we're going to draw those key cards like the Bell and the Tenacity of the Millilith. Now we don't end up drawing those cards, but we do still have some other relevant options now in our hand. For example, the Bannerana for storing dice, and the Liyue Harbour Wolf to allow us to draw potentially even more cards. And these options will help us out on this turn. So the more cards you draw, the more consistent you're going to be. We've only got 19 cards left in our deck, opponent's got 23 still. They've only got 1 card left in their hand, so I can already think it's probably not likely that they can do anything too insane with the rest of their dice. Maybe this is just like their Covenant of Rock left over. Either way, I don't need to be too worried. So I'm going to develop my Leeway Harbour Wharf to keep drawing more cards, more options. It's still early enough in the game that that's going to be really useful, and I could still hope to draw maybe the Bell. I don't find that key piece, but I do still have a lot of good options in hand, which could be important in the last few turns of this game. So let's see where we can go from here. A lot of these options, we don't necessarily want to play them all immediately. Let's save them until we know they're going to be most useful. I haven't lost yet, so we have the option to potentially sacrifice a character and not feel too bad about it. And the opponent probably, because I've got so many cards in my hand, they know they have to play around that as well. So they've only got 3 cards left in hand, and in fact they just pass their turn here. So I can look at all the options I've got, some of which opponent might not be expecting, because this is all hidden information, and realise I actually do have a way to kill their Noel here by swapping to Ito and using, I've got a total of 4 extra dice here from my cards that I can use for the finishing blow. And this is something I wouldn't have if I hadn't invested the resources into drawing the cards to gain these options. And in this situation, with their carry taken out, opponent concedes the game. Okay, in this game we're going to be looking about using cards and value of card advantage. So in general, cards give you more options, and sometimes those options are really powerful, and your opponent won't know which cards you have in hand, so they won't know which options you have.
You will live.
But cards also have the extra mode, of course, that they help maintain your consistency, and you should never be scared of using them for tuning, as long as you're aware which options you need to keep hold of. So, let's see how we go about this. We're just going to start off, and our starting dice, our rolls, are not very good. So we're already going to have to start tuning on turn 1, and we don't even have really anything useful to do with our dice. The Ito is a good card. I haven't got lost yet, is a really good card. And the Sealy is the saving grace that will help dig us out of this hole, hopefully, since the more extra cards we draw will maybe help us tune, or maybe they'll even be fixing cards to help with our problems directly. But the send-offs are really useless in this matchup. There's nothing to send off. So we know immediately that these are just for tuning only. So I'm going to start off developing the Sealy. It's so important to get it going. Tuning one of these in order to use Raiden Shogun's Burst. Use skill in this case. Now, I mean, we still have to make efficient use of our dice as much as possible. So, while it hurts, it would be a death sentence to not use these dice at all. We have to tune one of our I haven't lost yet cards. But this last one here is so incredibly valuable. We want to avoid tuning this as much as possible. But we're at least working towards our Sealy, and hopefully the 3 cards we draw off that will improve our chances, and I mean, hopefully we'll get better rolls on the next turn, right? Okay. Opponent's built up some energy on play, and use them on efficiently to roll on to equip gamblers to their kicking. And our rolls here, since we know there's no use for electro dice, we're not going to use Raiden skill again. We roll our electro dice, and we end up with a grand total of 2 useful dice. Okay, so we're going to have to think again about tuning on this turn. So our useful die is a Dendro die, so it makes sense to go to Nahida. Now in this situation we start to think about, okay, can an opponent start to kill off any of our characters? And in this situation, opponent, if they do have Pyro Resonance and a quick swap, and a way of generating a die, they could kill Nahida, which would almost certainly be game for us. But we're not in a good position to play around that, so let's do what we can. Tune a card, use Nahida skill, trigger the CD, see what we get. Okay, so no more die fixing here. We did get Vanarana, which means if we can't use any dice, well, we can maybe use them for this. specifically. And okay, if we want to use any of our skills and any of our characters here, we would need to tune 3 cards. And boy, do we not want to just throw away 3 cards. That throws away all of our options. Opponent would know pretty much we don't have anything except maybe the I haven't lost yet that we would undoubtedly keep. And it will be a terribly rough situation. So instead, I'm going to use my dice, maybe to get some value out of swaps. They swap to a pyro character. They don't seem to have a quick swap, otherwise they could have done a lot of damage to Nahida already. So let's just start off by swapping off Nahida to our Zhangling here. The opponent's going to end up ending a turn. Well, in that case, let's make sure we're on the character that we might want to start next turn with. Opponent's going first. They could potentially work towards Klee's Burst, or even kill a character with an Adaptation, or find a quick swap to Keqing. So very likely whatever character we leave on here could die. Let's use our last die because we have no other use for it. Save our cards in hand. But just play a Bannerana to carry this dice forward. Okay, so despite some terrible rolls, we've managed to save some core cards in hand, so we have some options. But we weren't afraid either to tune the less useful cards when we needed to. Again, our rolls here aren't great, but we do have 4 useful dice as well as this pile of garbage. And we have managed to, with the help of the Sealy and the extra draws, we end up drawing some fixing in the form of the Best Travel Companion. Our opponent, we can see here, he doesn't seem to have the nuts, at least he doesn't have a quick swap into a kill, or he doesn't feel it's worth using a Raiden Shogun. Either way, I wouldn't mind if the Raiden Shogun had died, but if he's not going to use it on Raiden Shogun, well, I'm happy if he chooses to use it on the Zhangling. I'm going to reroll here, see what useful dice I can get. Keeping a few different elements to have my options open. I might want to swap to Raiden to use her burst later maybe with the I haven't lost yet. I might want to swap to Nahida to use her skill. Let's see. The opponent's going to lower this character to 5 health, setting up potentially an easy kill with Keqing. Now I don't really mind if that happens. So I could use the Lotus Flower Crisp, but actually my dice work out really awkwardly if I do that. And I'm expecting to need all my dice this turn. So I say to my opponent, you can kill my Zhangling if you decide to. And the opponent decides it would not be a good idea for them to do that. Because then I would get value out of this I haven't got lost yet, presumably in hand. Okay, well now since I have these options I've kept, specifically in this case the changing shifts is a really important option. I can plan a turn which will let me actually take out his Bennett before the Bennett gets to burst. I didn't necessarily know I had that option, because since I only have 2 change shifts in deck, maybe they can't play around it. But it definitely does give me a very strong option here, which I'm going to execute. And I'm saving the 2 most important cards in my hand, I haven't lost yet, and Lotus Flower Crisp, which are very strong on the last few turns.